You ever get the feeling that what we see in the world, it's all just a big performance? Well, that's the pretty wild idea at the center of the Eon Podcast's 2025 Year in Review. Today, we're going to unpack their argument that this past year was the year the masks finally came off. So when you look back at 2025, what really defined it? According to the analyst over at Eon, it wasn't just one big event. Nope, it was more like this powerful undercurrent that, shaped pretty much everything, from global politics to the media we all consume. And that undercurrent, well, that's what they're calling the Great Unmasking. The core idea here is that 2025 was the year when all the hidden stuff, the things happening behind the scenes, finally came out into the open. The pretense, as they put it, is over. All right, so where exactly did this great unmasking happen? The Aeon analysts point to four key areas. We're going to look at the rise of something called Pax Judaica, how journalism became stenography, Pakistan's new political playbook, and then we'll wrap it all up with their list of 2025's winners and losers. Okay, let's kick things off with that first point, the rise of Pax Judaica. This is all about the global mask dropping. The hosts are arguing that there's been a huge shift in global power, and it's all happening right out in the open now. So, Pax Judaica, what does that actually mean? Well, the hosts credit this idea to the late Dr. Israr Ahmed, and they define it as this new era where Israel is trying to control the wider Middle East, but not through, direct occupation. Instead, it's about using economic tools and influence over other countries in the region, using them as proxies. And this is a huge deal, they say, because it signals a move away from their old defensive stance to something that's way more assertive and, expansionist. And this is where you can really see that unmasking idea in action. The argument from the podcast is basically this. What used to be done in the shadows, these covert ops like Operation Susanna back in the 50s, is now happening right out in the open. They say that post-October 7th, that's when things really shifted from covert to overt. And they point to a bunch of examples to back this up. Things like recognizing Somaliland, the unrest we've seen in Sudan, the conflict in Yemen, and they often highlight the UAE acting as a major partner in all of this. For them, this is all evidence of this new, much more open strategy of projecting power across the region. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the media, where the hosts argue another mask has dropped. They claim the whole idea of journalistic objectivity, well, it hasn't just slipped. They say it's been completely shattered. It's a pretty bold claim, right? They put it bluntly, journalism is just stenography. The idea is that instead of digging for the truth and doing real investigations, journalists are now they're just transcribing talking points. They're pushing an agenda for a specific state or a political group. Now look, they argue this isn't exactly a new phenomenon. I mean, big global broadcasters have always, to some extent, served the interests of their home countries. You've got the BBC for the UK, RT for Russia, and so on. But what they're saying is that in 2025, the pretense, that mask of objectivity, it's just gone, completely abandoned. And here's the really big shift they spotted this year. This idea of being a stenographer doesn't just apply to the huge, state-funded media giants anymore. They're arguing that now, everyone, from the biggest news networks all the way down to individual YouTubers, is seen as pushing an angle for one side or another. It's basically the end of the line for the idea of a truly independent journalist. Okay, so this whole theme of unmasking doesn't stop at geopolitics or the media. It also gets applied to domestic politics. The hosts bring up a really interesting example from Pakistan, where they say a brand new political playbook is being written. And they set up this great contrast between two different styles. On one side, you have what they call the old guard, like Gandapur. This is all about loud, direct confrontation with the state, which, often doesn't end well. But on the other side, you have this new playbook. And they use a newcomer, Sohail Afridi, as the prime example. His whole approach is way more strategic, more grassroots, and it's all about avoiding direct fights. So they break down Afridi's method into 3 simple but really smart steps. First, he just refuses to be provoked into a fight. Second, if the authorities block one path, he doesn't try to smash through it, he just finds another one. And third, and this is key, his focus is on meeting people, mass canvassing, direct engagement. And why is this so effective? Well, the podcast argues it completely sidesteps the state's biggest weapon, which is force, and instead plays to a strength the state just doesn't have, a real connection with the people. All right, so after a whole year of unmasking, who actually came out on top and who took the biggest hits? Let's get to the Eon Podcast's final tally of winners and losers. So here's their scorecard, and the reasoning is pretty interesting. For activism, they picked Greta Thunberg as a winner because of her really uncompromising stance. They contrast her with Malala Yousafzai, who they feel has gotten a bit too close to the establishment. In geopolitics, Bashar al-Assad is a winner because he's slowly being welcomed back into the Arab world. And the losers? India and the UAE, for what the podcast called a string of foreign policy blunders. And then there's this original gangster category. They give that award to something they call the chair government. It's their name for that unelected, permanent state bureaucracy that they believe is really pulling the strings behind the scenes. And just to really hammer home their point about India having a particularly bad year, the hosts kept coming back to this one really dismissive phrase. Who? India? The suggestion here is that in 2025, the country lost a significant amount of its global influence and prestige.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started. What if the world really is just a performance? If 2025 truly was the year the masks came off for good, it leaves us all with a pretty tough but essential question, doesn't it? In a world where there's no pretense, who or what can you actually trust? And maybe even more important, now that we can see things more clearly, what are we going to do about it?